Ann Weiss orders her son Scotty's birthday cake on Saturday afternoon and is disappointed that the baker is not more friendly with her. On Monday, Scotty's 8th birthday, he gets knocked down by a car on the way to school. He walks back home, where he collapses. Ann calls her husband, Howard, who calls an ambulance and drives to the hospital to meet them. Scotty vomits and does not regain consciousness. The parents spend time with Scotty at the hospital, worried because even though the doctors think Scotty should be fine, he doesn't wake up. There's a brain scan, more waiting, and blood tests over the course of 3 days, and finally talk of an operation. In the meantime, Ann meets an African-American family whose son, Franklin, is being operated on after being stabbed at a party. She learns later that Franklin died. When Howard and Ann take turns freshening up at home, and then later, after Scotty has died and they've gone home to notify family and make arrangements, they keep getting phone calls from the baker. There's a cake here that wasn't picked up, and have you forgotten about Scotty? When Ann realizes who the disturbing caller is, she and Howard go to the mall in the middle of the night to confront the baker. She calls him a bastard and then tells him that her son died and that they were waiting with him at the hospital. Then she collapses into tears. The baker apologizes for acting so badly and then gives them coffee, rolls, and butter, urging them to eat. For the first time in days, Ann and Howard are hungry. They connect with the baker as he tells them about his lonely life. This story has a limited, omniscient narrator with Ann's point of view, and to some extent, Howard's point of view. The baker in particular is seen from outside. So let's look at a few instances of this. On page 117, when we first get a good look at Howard, he's driving home from the hospital by himself to take a break, and we get a review of his life being smooth to this point. So he was happy and lucky, and he knew that right at the middle of the page. So we're getting something that he knows, which you don't know from the outside, you only know from the inside of his head. He pulls into the driveway and parked. His left leg began to tremble. He sat in the car for a minute and tried to deal with the present situation in a rational manner, something that you wouldn't know just by looking at him from the outside. You wouldn't know if he's trying to deal with the situation or if he's really quite detached and not thinking anything. Scotty had been hit by a car and was in the hospital, but he was going to be all right. This is the thought inside Howard's head. And then take a look at page 120. At the middle of the page, we are in Howard's point of view. He wanted to say something else and reassure her, but he was afraid too. He took her hand and put it in his lap, and this made him feel better, her hand being there. We know it makes him feel better because we're inside his head at the moment. Take a look about 3/4 of the way down the page. We are inside Ann's head. Howard's just told her that he's been praying. For the first time, she felt that they were together in it, this trouble. She realized with a start that until now it had only been happening to her and to Scotty. She hadn't let Howard into it, though he was there and needed all along. She felt glad to be his wife. So for most of the time, we're inside Ann's point of view. We know how she feels when she goes to order the cake. We know how she feels as she sits beside the hospital bed but we're also treated to Howard's point of view too. We're on the outside when it comes to the baker. We hear his voice on the phone, but it's totally random and we have no idea why he's doing it. This story is unlike some of the ones that we've been reading recently. It has a very straightforward chronological timeline. Everything moves forward in time, and you don't have any sense of what life was like before Saturday when Anne ordered the cake. There aren't any flashbacks, and it isn't until the baker is telling Anne and Howard about his life at the end of the story that you get a sense of retrospect. Someone might have been different in the past and now he's this way. But this is not our flashback. It's just his explanation of who he is that's happening in the current timeline of the story. This story has an interesting tone, and I want you to think about what the attitude is of this third-person narrator toward the incidents and the characters. Is there a distance, or is the narrator regarding them warmly? Is there a sense that the narrator likes Anne and Howard, or is the narrator at some distance from them? On page 128, after they go home when Scotty is dead, you have the narrator switching over to a dramatic, objective point of view with detachment. At the bottom of the page, when he goes out to the garage, he dropped the box and sat down on the pavement beside the bicycle. He took hold of the bicycle awkwardly so that it leaned against his chest. He held it, the rubber pedal sticking into his chest. He gave the wheel a turn. We're not inside his head at this point. Think about what this objective, third-person, detached narration does for the story. Would you call the tone remote? Would you call it objective? What would you say about the tone? It's pretty obvious that one of the themes of this story is human connection and its challenges. Anne is the character who's most aware of her desire to connect. So on page 116, when she gives up trying to be friendly with the baker, she is aware that she feels uncomfortable. She doesn't like feeling uncomfortable. She is aware of what her expectations are of the baker. They must have it in common that they've both had kids and they've both had the excitement of milestones, birthdays, celebrations, and she wants to connect with him and is disappointed. You see Anne desiring to connect with the African American family on page 124. She notes that they have the same fear, they're in the same kind of waiting that she is. She would like to connect with them, but she doesn't know how to begin. She gets a certain nurture from the doctor's hug on page 128. Right above the middle of the page, Dr. Francis put his arms around Anne once more. He seemed full of some goodness that she didn't understand. She let her head rest on his shoulder. So she is aware of connectedness and that it's good. And this is the same kind of goodness that the baker means when he says, eating is a small good thing at a time like this. It's not the eating necessarily that's good. It wouldn't be helping them nearly as much to be eating the stale birthday cake at home, but for him to connect with them by offering them something that's fresh at the bakery, that's what's good. The baker is a lonely man, and he says that his loneliness has made him into a different kind of human being. On page 131, he says, "I'm just a baker." What it comes down to is, I don't know how to act anymore, it would seem. So perhaps part of the message of this story is that we need to be in connection with other people so that we can remember how to behave, how to act.